My son Brandon lifted his glass in a toast to my birthday, smiling as he casually called my life a waste. The chatter at the table died instantly. He didn't stick around to see the damage he caused, just stood up and left, leaving me sitting there humiliated. What he didn't know was that I'd been planning to surprise him with the deed to a $2 million house that night. His words cut through me like a blade, slicing into decades of sacrifice. But that evening wasn't the end, it was the spark that lit something dangerous. I made up my mind then and there. Brandon and his ice-cold wife, Lindsay, were going to feel the weight of their neglect. My revenge wouldn't be quick, it would be deliberate, fair, and it would land exactly where it needed to. And I already knew how to begin. The restaurant had been buzzing with the usual clinking of glasses and the kind of polite laughter people use to fill awkward gaps. But the air turned heavy the second Brandon raised his glass. His words, calling my life wasted, hung in the room like smoke, choking everyone into silence. I held my wine glass, the stem cool against my palm, and forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Around me, the guests, half business friends of Brandon's, half a few old neighbors of mine, suddenly became very interested in their plates. The silence roared louder than anything Brandon had said. Brandon leaned back in his chair with a smirk, his tie already loose like he'd just scored some victory. Lindsay sat beside him, her diamond earrings throwing little sparks of light from the chandelier. She sipped her wine slowly, the corners of her mouth curling in just enough to let me know she was enjoying the moment. My chest burned, but I kept my voice even. "You done?" I asked, low enough that it almost came out as a growl. He laughed, a sharp, mean sound. "Done, Dad? I'm just getting started. You sit there like you're some saint, but what do you have? This?" He waved a dismissive hand at the restaurant, at the half-eaten birthday cake with "Happy 62nd" written in icing. "You're a nobody. Always were." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't react. Not yet. I thought about the house, the $2 million tied up in that deed sitting in my pocket, my entire life savings meant for him and Lindsay. It was supposed to be my gift to him, my way of giving him the life I never had. Now, that deed felt like a useless stone weighing me down. Lindsay leaned forward, her voice smooth enough to hide the poison in it. "Walter, we don't need your approval. We've earned our place." She paused, letting her eyes drift over me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. "You're just here." I set my glass down with a quiet clink that seemed to echo. "I was going to give you something tonight," I said, my tone calm even though my pulse was hammering in my ears. "A house. Paid in full. But after this..." I looked first at Brandon, then at Lindsay. "Forget it." The room froze. A woman at the next table actually gasped. Brandon's face twisted, a flush creeping up his cheeks. "You're lying!" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to make wine slosh over the rim of a glass, staining the white cloth like blood. "You! A house? You're too cheap to buy a new car." I didn't bother answering. He saw the truth in my eyes, and that only made him angrier. He shoved his chair back so hard it toppled. "You're pathetic, Dad. Always the victim. I'm done with you." Lindsay's nails dug into his sleeve as she grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Brand. He's not worth it." She shot me one last look, cold, dismissive, like I was garbage left out on the curb, and they headed for the door. Brandon's shoes squeaked on the polished floor until the door slammed behind them, sharp as a gunshot. The guests mumbled to each other, avoiding my eyes. A waiter hovered unsure, then started clearing plates. The table was a wreck, crumpled napkins, half-eaten meals, and that untouched cake mocking me from the center. I sat there alone, the tick of the restaurant's clock drilling into my skull. 62 years. And this was my reward, a son who spat in my face and a daughter-in-law who saw me as some outdated relic. I paid the bill with a steady hand, though my insides felt like a storm. When I stepped outside, the night air was sharp and cool. I didn't head home right away. Instead, I walked. The city lights blurred in my vision as my mind kept replaying Brandon's words. each one cutting deeper than the last. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred, a memory of a promise I'd once made to myself. When I finally did go home, the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I sat in the living room, the only light coming from a lamp that flickered every time the wind rattled the windows. In my lap was the family album, the leather cover worn soft from years of use. I opened it. There we were, me, Margaret, and little Brandon at a long-ago picnic. His tiny hand clutched a balloon, his grin wide enough to split his face. I traced the photograph with my thumb, smudging the edge. Where had that boy gone? My mind drifted back to the day I sold my old Honda. It was beat up, but I loved that car. Brandon was 18, newly accepted into a college I could barely afford. I stood in the driveway watching a stranger drive it away, the cash in my pocket feeling like I'd just betrayed an old friend. That money paid for Brandon's first semester. That night he hugged me, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make you proud, Dad. I'll pay you back." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I flipped to another photo, Brandon at graduation, his cap tilted, his smile cocky. I'd worked myself to exhaustion, pulling double shifts to pay for his tuition. When his first business, a tech startup he swore would change the world, collapsed, I bailed him out with $50,000. He'd called me his hero then, promised he'd never forget. The album felt heavier now. I turned another page, Margaret's funeral. Brandon stood apart, scrolling on his phone while I shook hands with mourners. He didn't stay long. "Got a meeting, Dad?" he mumbled before disappearing, leaving me in that empty church. I hadn't cried that day. I didn't know how. The silence in the house pressed in harder, broken only by the creak of the floorboards. I closed the album and let my fingers rest on its cover. All those years, I told myself the sacrifices were worth it, every sleepless night, every missed vacation, every dream I shelved, they were all for him. And what did I get? A son who called me a failure in front of a room full of strangers. My gaze drifted to the wall, to the clock Margaret had loved. Its ticking was relentless, each second a reminder I'd never get back. I stood, letting the album slide onto the couch. Enough. I'd spent too long waiting for Brandon to be the son I thought I'd raised. He wasn't that boy anymore. Maybe he never was. The floor was cold under my socks as I crossed to my desk. My laptop sat in the dark. I opened it, the blue glow spilling into the room, harsh against the shadows. My hands hovered over the keys. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for yet. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to sit in this silence anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. The clock ticked on, steady as a heartbeat, pushing me forward. I typed Brandon's name into the search bar, each keystroke deliberate. A flood of articles popped up, his name attached to one shaky business deal after another. One headline jumped out at me, "Local entrepreneur faces scrutiny over unpaid debts." I leaned in, a slow, grim smile tugging at my mouth. So Brandon was in trouble. Good. I kept scrolling, stitching together the wreckage he'd left behind. His latest project, a fintech startup he'd been parading around like it was the second coming of Apple, was hemorrhaging money. Investors were bailing. I remembered him bragging about it last year, full of swagger and empty promises. I'd told him it sounded risky. He'd laughed in my face, said I was stuck in the past. Well, here was the proof. A memory surfaced, 2 years ago, over dinner. Brandon had been puffed up, bragging about a game-changing deal. I'd asked a couple of simple questions, about cash flow, contracts, just enough to see where the cracks might be. He'd snapped at me, told me to stick to my boring spreadsheets. And, like a fool, I let it go. I always let it go. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Jack, an old friend from my days as a financial consultant. He picked up on the second ring, voice gravelly but warm. "Walter, hell, it's late. You all right?" "I need a favor," I said evenly. "Brandon's business. I want the details, off the record." Jack paused, then gave a short laugh. Your kid's been playing with fire, hasn't he? I've heard whispers. Give me a day, I'll dig up what I can. He's not my kid anymore, I said, sharper than I meant. Jack didn't push. He promised to call tomorrow, then hung up. I set the phone down, feeling my pulse settle for the first time all night. Pulling a notepad from the desk drawer, I began to write, Brandon, debts, bad deals. Lindsay, image, social media. Lindsay was an Instagram influencer, her life a perfectly filtered fantasy. I'd seen her kind before, living for likes, allergic to truth. One crack in that flawless facade, and it would all come down. Her weakness was as clear as Brandon's. The pen scratched against the paper as I made notes. Quiet moves, nothing flashy. This wasn't some cartoon villain's plot. It was justice. I'd spent decades building a life, a fortune, while they squandered theirs. They'd underestimated me. That was their mistake. I stood and shut the study door, the click sounding final. The room no longer felt like a retreat, it felt like a war room. The clock's ticking didn't bother me anymore. It was counting down to something new. Back at my desk, I refreshed the screen. A new article popped up, Brandon's smiling face plastered next to some investor he was shaking hands with. All teeth, no soul. I clicked, and there it was. The first loose thread to pull. The library's reading room smelled of old paper and dust, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes. I sat in a back corner, surrounded by stacks of financial journals, their pages yellowed and crisp. My laptop hummed softly, open to a database of corporate filings. Brandon's name stared back at me from the screen, tied to what looked like a sinking ship. I jotted a note, overleveraged. Investors fleeing. It felt almost nostalgic. I'd spent decades spotting the cracks in other people's deals, skills that had been gathering dust since I retired. Now they were waking up. Brandon's company was nothing but a house of cards, big promises, no structure. Then I found it, an article buried deep in an industry journal. It laid out a shady loan he'd taken to keep his startup afloat. The terms were predatory, designed to chew you up and spit you out. I smiled, thin and sharp. Reckless as always. But this was a gift. I thought back to a dinner last spring. Brandon, glass in hand, talking big about a bulletproof deal. I'd asked about his lender. He bristled, told me to mind my own business. I'd let it slide. Even paid for his wine. Never again. I pulled out my phone and called Jack. He answered in a low voice, like he was in the middle of something. Walter, you're obsessive, he said with a half-joking sigh. What now? Tell me about Brandon's loan, I said. The one from that offshore outfit. Jack exhaled hard. It's ugly. Sky-high interest, tied to a shell company with a reputation for making people disappear financially. He's already missed payments. Word is they're circling. And there's talk of an ethics probe, numbers not adding up. You sure you want to walk this road? He asked. I'm sure, I said flatly. He promised more details and hung up. I leaned back, the chair creaking. An ethics probe could ruin him. The library around me was silent except for the rustle of pages and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. I walked to the copier, feeding in the article about Brandon's loan. The machine spat out each page like it was ammunition. Back at the table, I shifted my focus to Lindsay. Her Instagram looked like a shrine to herself. Designer handbags, champagne brunches, brand sponsorships. But in the comments, I saw the hairline fractures, brands pulling out, whispers about inflated follower numbers. It wouldn't take much to shatter her world. I stacked the documents, edges uneven, and slid them into a folder. The clock read 3:17 p.m. Time was moving, and so was I. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the library's glass doors. I stepped into the cold, folder under my arm, and walked to a small cafe down the block. The corner booth was dim, the kind of place no one notices you in. My laptop's glow lit the table. The air smelled of burnt coffee and day-old pastries. I connected to a VPN and started typing, each word careful and precise. The email was addressed to one of Brandon's investors, a man named Hargrove, notorious for cutting his losses without hesitation. The subject line was short: concerns about your investment. Attached, scanned copies of the loan agreement, and that damning trade journal article. No name, no signature, no trace, just the facts. My finger hovered over. Send. This was it, the first cut. I thought of Brandon's smirk on my birthday, his voice dripping with contempt as he called my life wasted. He'd laugh then. Let's see him laugh now. Click. The email was gone, a silent arrow in the air. A memory surfaced, years ago, Brandon boasting about his genius deals. I'd warned him about shady partners. He'd brushed me off. You're stuck in the past, Dad, he'd said. Maybe I was stuck, but I knew how to play the game clean and quiet. Skills he'd never learned. My phone buzzed, snapping me back. Brandon's name lit the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice steady. You bastard, he hissed, his words slurring with rage. You sent that email, didn't you? Hargrove just pulled out, my deal's tanking. I leaned back in the booth, the old vinyl groaning under me. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, slow and deliberate, making sure each word landed. Sounds like your mess finally caught up with you, I added. Don't play dumb, he shouted. Somewhere in the background, something shattered, glass, maybe a bottle. You're trying to ruin me, he barked. You're doing that all on your own, I replied, and then hung up. My pulse stayed steady, my hands cool as ice. I opened my inbox. There it was, a reply from Whitman's assistant. Mr. Whitman is reviewing the materials and has paused all commitments. Perfect. The cafe's clock ticked on, the hands crawling toward evening. I checked Brandon's latest thread, empty. He was scrambling now, while I was just getting started. Lindsay was next. Her sponsors would have a field day with what I'd uncovered about her so-called authentic brand. I shut the laptop, the glow fading from the screen, and headed for the door. The bell jingled as I stepped outside. In my pocket, a small recorder sat heavy, its weight a quiet promise of what was coming. The knock on my door later was sharp, like steel hitting steel. I knew exactly who it was before I even touched the handle. My fingers brushed over the recorder in my pocket, the button already pressed. The living room was dark except for a lone lamp flickering in the corner, throwing long shadows across the walls. I opened the door, and there they were. Brandon, face red and twisted, and Lindsay, her eyes cold as winter frost. Her perfume hit me before her words did, sharp, floral, and almost insulting. You've gone too far, Brandon spat, shoving his way inside. His shoes scuffed my hardwood floor. Lindsay followed, heels clicking, her purse clutched like a shield. I closed the door with a loud, deliberate click. Sit, I said, pointing to the couch. They didn't. Brandon paced like a caged animal, fists balled, while Lindsay stood stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. You tanked my deal, Brandon said, his voice low but dangerous. Whitman's gone, and now the bank's calling. You owe me, Dad. Fix this. I crossed my arms, my face unreadable. Oh, you want my help? After what you called me? Lindsay stepped forward, her voice smooth and practiced. Walter, let's be reasonable. We're family. You don't want to ruin Brandon's future, do you? Her smile was all gloss, her eyes told the real story. Family? I said, my tone colder than the air between us. Family doesn't humiliate each other in front of strangers. Brandon slammed his palm against the wall. The sound was sharp enough to make the lamp flicker. Enough games. Give me the money to cover the loan, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a selfish old man you are. I didn't flinch. The recorder hummed quietly in my pocket, catching every word. You're not getting a dime, I told him. You made your choices. Lindsay's mask cracked. You're pathetic, Walter, hoarding your money while we struggle. You're no father. She turned to Brandon. Let's go. He's useless. Brandon glared, his breath ragged. This isn't over. I'll bury you. He stormed to the door, Lindsay close behind. The slam echoed through the quiet house. The clock in the hall ticked on, steady and relentless. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, the red light still glowing. I played it back. Their voices came through clear, Brandon's threats, Lindsay's venom. My lips curved, not quite into a smile. This was gold. I sat at my desk, set the recorder beside my laptop, and woke the screen with a tap. A new file blinked open. Brandon and Lindsay thought they could bully me into submission. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I was in Simon's cramped little office. The air smelled like ink and stale coffee. Stacks of paper leaned precariously on his desk, and the old window AC rattled like it was dying. I slid a USB drive across to him. Simon, my old friend and occasional legal counsel, raised his eyebrows and plugged it into his laptop. The wall clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder that time was finally on my side. I leaned back in his creaky chair, notebook open in my lap, its pages filled with neat, precise steps. Simon hit play. Brandon's threats, Lindsay's poison. The deeper he listened, the deeper his frown. "This is dynamite, Walter," he said finally. "But dangerous. You sure you want to play this game?" "I'm not playing," I said quietly, steady. "They crossed a line. I'm just evening the score." He rubbed his chin and nodded. "All right. We can use it, but no fingerprints. Anonymous leaks, third parties. You're too close to this." He scribbled something down. "What's the end game?" I didn't answer outright. My plan was a mosaic, pieces slowly clicking into place. The recording would discredit Lindsay. Brandon's creditors would tighten the noose. I'd spent decades untangling other people's financial messes. Now I'd unravel my own son's life. "Just make sure it's airtight," I said. Back home, the house was quiet except for the clock ticking in the hall, steady, like a heartbeat. I opened my notebook. Step 1. Alert Brandon's creditors about his missed payments. Public records only, just enough to push them into action. Step 2. Leak Lindsay's recording to a rival influencer, someone hungry enough to tear her down for free publicity. Each line I wrote was another brick in the wall I was building, one that would close in around them. I thought back to Brandon's birthday toast, his smug little grin as he called me worthless. That memory burned, but it also fueled me. I'd given him everything, my money, my time, my dreams. And Lindsay, with her slick cruelty, had cheered him on. They thought I was weak. A relic. They'd see. Simon called later, his voice low. "First moves ready. Letters to the creditors drafted. No trace back to you. Send them tomorrow, and they'll be on Brandon like vultures." "Good," I said. The envelope sat on my desk, heavy with finality. I picked it up. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall. The sun broke through my kitchen blinds the next morning, striping the table in gold and shadow. I sipped my coffee, sharp and bitter, and unfolded the newspaper. The headline jumped out at me: "Local entrepreneur faces financial ruin." Brandon's name was there in bold, his grainy photo showing him ducking away from cameras. I set the mug down, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. The clock's ticking felt like nails in his coffin. 2 days earlier, I'd mailed the letter, a polite little tip about his unpaid debts. All public record. Untouchable. The creditors hadn't wasted a second. Jack called while I was scanning the article. "It's a bloodbath, Walter. Brandon's office is a ghost town. Creditors froze his accounts. He's done." "Good," I said, turning the page. "What else?" Jack hesitated. "He's fighting with Lindsay. I heard them at a bar last night. She was screaming about her brand, how he's dragging her down. They're cracking. I remembered Brandon at 25, bright-eyed, swearing he'd build an empire. I believed him. I'd poured everything I had into his first business. And when it crashed, he blamed everyone but himself. "You're too cautious, Dad," he'd said back then. That caution? It was my weapon now. The article laid it all out plain: Brandon's screw-ups, investors bailing one after another, contracts getting torn apart, and a lawsuit already taking shape. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking under me, and let the words sink in. Each sentence felt like another brick I'd carefully set in place, each of his failures one more step toward the justice I'd been waiting for. That's when Jack's voice sliced through my thoughts. You didn't hear this from me, he said, but Brandon's out there begging for a bailout. Nobody's biting. Let him beg, I told him flatly, and hung up. I flipped open my laptop, the screen blooming to life with a soft glow. Social media was buzzing with Brandon's name, memes tearing him apart, angry rants from former business partners. He was unraveling, and I was just sitting back, untouched, watching it all happen. But Lindsay, she was still standing. Her Instagram was nothing but a glossy facade, pretending everything was fine. It wouldn't hold, not with what I had. I thought about the recording, her voice dripping with that smug contempt, and knew one wrong move from her would send her sponsors running. I pulled up the profile of another influencer, one with a personal grudge against Lindsay and an audience big enough to cause real damage. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to strike. The living room was dark, the only light spilling from my laptop screen. I'd already sent the recording to Kay, a blogger who tangled with Lindsay before. The email was anonymous, the file untraceable. Now I scrolled through Lindsay's page. Her latest post was a thinly veiled cry for help: ignore the lies. I'm still your girl. The comments section was a battlefield, fans turning on her, sponsors going quiet. I pictured her phone sitting dark and lifeless, the screen reflecting back the reality she didn't want to face. The mantle clock ticked on, counting down the last moments of her reign. Kay had moved fast. She'd posted the recording the night before, Lindsay's voice sharp and cruel, saying, "He's useless. Pathetic." The clip spread like wildfire, racking up views until brands couldn't drop her fast enough. By morning, their logos had vanished from her profile. I leaned back on the couch, the springs groaning, and let a small smile creep across my face. She'd once called me invisible at a party, her laughter like broken glass. Invisible? Not anymore. I thought about that night, her and Brandon standing together, mocking me in front of their friends. I'd swallowed the sting, gone home, and sat right here in this same room. Back then, the silence had felt empty. Now, it felt powerful, like the heavy calm that rolls in before a storm. I refreshed the page. A new post from Lindsay appeared, a shaky video. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm not that person," she pleaded. Her mascara was smudged, her voice thin, and the comments shredded her. Jack called again, his tone almost giddy. "Lindsay's done, Walter. No sponsors, no invites, she's radioactive." He paused. "You're playing one hell of a game." "No game," I told him evenly. "Just consequences." I hung up, my eyes still locked on the screen. A news site headline caught my attention: "Influencers Fall Shocks Chicago Elite." Lindsay's photo sat right there, her forced smile staring back at me. I closed the laptop with a sharp click, stood, and stretched. It was late, but I wasn't the least bit tired. Brandon and Lindsay were backed into a corner, their lives buckling under the weight of their own greed. Everything was going according to plan, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. The sudden knock at the door shattered the quiet, hard, urgent. My pulse jumped, but I didn't flinch. I already knew who it was. I crossed the room, my steps steady, and reached for the handle. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the frame. In the dim hallway, the wall clock ticked like a metronome. My hand rested on the knob, steady as I turned it. Brandon and Lindsay stood there, drenched from the rain, faces pale and hollow. Brandon's shirt was soaked through and wrinkled, clinging to him. Lindsay's makeup had streaked down her cheeks, her eyes red and hollow, and the sharp smell of wet asphalt clung to them, cutting against the warmth of my house. "Dad," Brandon started, his voice breaking. "We're sorry, We were wrong, please. He stepped forward, shoes squelching on the floor. Lindsay clutched her purse so tight her knuckles went white. You've got to help us, she said, her tone almost gentle, pleading, but behind it, I caught that familiar spark of calculation. I didn't move. Brandon's toast from years ago flashed in my mind, the smirk, the words, "Your life's a waste." I saw Lindsay's cold smile, the way she'd once dismissed me as nothing. And now, here they were, broken and begging. You! I said, my voice low. Even after everything you've done. Brandon's face twisted in desperation. We lost it all, the business, the sponsors, everything's gone. His hands trembled as he ran one through his soaked hair. You did this, didn't you? But I'm your son, you can't just destroy me. Lindsay's hand brushed his arm, her voice smooth, rehearsed. Walter, we're family. You're better than this. Let's fix it together. Her words were sweet, sticky like honey, but they rang hollow. I stepped back, my eyes hard. The clock ticked through the silence. You made your choices, I said. You spat on everything I gave you. Family. You don't know the meaning of it. Brandon lunged forward, yelling. You're heartless. You ruined us. I raised a hand, stopping him cold. Lindsay grabbed his sleeve, nails digging in, but her eyes stayed on me, searching for a crack. She found none. Get out, I said, deliberate. You're not welcome here. Brandon's jaw dropped, breath ragged. Lindsay's face hardened, her mask slipping. You'll regret this, Walter, she hissed, but her voice quivered underneath. I opened the door wider. Rain pattered against the porch. They hesitated, then slowly turned. Brandon muttered under his breath, and the door closed with a heavy thud, locking them out. The silence that followed was thick, unbroken except for the steady tick of the clock. I walked back into the living room, steps slow and deliberate. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Emily, her smile soft and timeless. I touched the glass, fingers lingering. You'd have hated this, Em, I murmured. But it's done. The weight of the night settled over me, but it wasn't heavy. It felt final. The next morning, the sun blazed over the community center, its lawn dotted with balloons and banners. A crowd milled about, warm chatter filling the air, buzzing with excitement. I stood at the podium, the microphone cool in my hand. A bronze plaque gleamed behind me, Emily Greenwood Foundation. The air smelled of fresh grass and hope. Even the nearby clock tower ticked faintly, a quiet reminder that time moved forward. I cleared my throat. This foundation, I said, my voice steady, is for families who need a hand up, for kids who deserve a chance. It's Emily's dream, and today, it's real. Applause erupted. Hands clapped, faces smiled. I scanned the crowd, neighbors, strangers, a few old colleagues. No Brandon. No Lindsay. Just people who believed. Emily's face flashed in my mind, her laugh bright as we dreamed of giving back together. We never got there together, but I was here now, honoring her. My chest tightened, but I pushed through. Shaking hands, people approached me. A young mother held her son close, clutching a scholarship letter. This changes everything, she said, eyes shining. I nodded, words caught in my throat. An organizer, a wiry man named Paul, leaned in as the crowd thinned. Heard your sons are in rough shape, he whispered. Skip town, they say. I shrugged, face neutral. That's his story, not mine. Paul nodded and let it drop. The rumors didn't matter. Brandon and Lindsay were shadows now, their lives a cautionary tale. When the ceremony ended, I walked to my car. The sun was warm on my back. The foundation had been funded, millions from my savings, built over decades of quiet discipline. I'd never flaunted it. I never needed to. Now, it was Emily's legacy, not just mine. The thought steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I paused at the mailbox on my way to the car. A single envelope waited, handwriting unmistakably Brandon's. My fingers brushed it, the paper rough against my skin. I slipped it into my pocket unopened. The clock tower chimed, notes drifting on the breeze. I wasn't ready to read it, not yet, maybe never. The memorial garden was quiet. Emily's stone marker glowed softly in the fading light. I sat on a bench, the air cool, carrying a faint scent of smoke. In my hand was Brandon's letter, edges creased from my grip. I'd read it once in the car, a jumble of excuses and please meet me, Dad. I can fix this. I shook my head, paper trembling slightly. Fix what? The years of disdain, the betrayal, there was nothing left to mend. I struck a match. The flame was small but fierce. The letter caught quickly, curling into ash that drifted to the ground. The fire felt right, cleansing, like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. The clock on my wrist ticked, a quiet promise of days ahead. I thought of Emily, her dream of Italy, cobblestone streets, warm cafes. We'd planned it together, but life got in the way. Now I'd go for both of us. Earlier, I'd called a travel agent. One ticket to Rome, I said firm. Next month. The agent chirped about itineraries, but I barely listened. My mind was already there, walking through history free. The thought brought a small, real smile. I brushed ash from my hands and approached the memorial. The stone was cold under my fingers, Emily's name carved deep. I did it, Em, I whispered. I'm free. The words hung soft against the quiet. Brandon and Lindsay were gone, their lives a distant echo. I didn't need to know where they were or what they'd do. They'd built their ruin. I'd built my peace. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold and pink. I walked to my car, gravel crunching underfoot. Rome waited in my mind, its bustle, warmth, and promise of a life unburdened. The clock ticked on, each second a step towards something new. I slid into the driver's seat, engine humming to life, and drove into the dusk. The road ahead wide open.